And so as we move into our next keynote panel, we are going to continue to rethink global security in a complex world. So with that, I will introduce Dr. Jonathan Caverley, who is a professor of strategy in our Strategic and Operational Research Department, better known as SWORD to many, in the Naval War College's Center for Naval Warfare Studies. And he will introduce our amazing panelists. You can see their bios again via the QR code in the programs. And at this point, let's welcome Dr. Caverley to the stage.
Walk-on music? Panelists, please come up. We did not select walk-on music, so. Can I invite the panelists to join us, or are they not here yet? We might be starting a bit early. Yeah, come on up. Yeah. I mean, do you guys want walk-on music? We can probably. The AV team is amazing here. Well, thank you, Dr. Johnson. Thank you, Syra. I really enjoy being the moderator for this particular panel. I did it last year. It's usually very thoughtful, and I got to break with tradition. We're not going to do serious introductions. I think we have links. I think there's usually quite a robust discussion that follows the opening remarks, so we're just going to dive right into it at 8:30. One of the things I love about this particular panel is we're a war college, we're a PME institution, and when I do research on the research side, I'm in the Strategic and Operational Research Department, and then my sister department is the Wargaming Department, and they're more operational and tactical. And one of the things we try to explain to people is like the different levels of thinking about the same task, which is basically deterrence or warfighting. And what's great about this panel, right, is that we literally have people who can think across all three levels, but professionally they specialize in one. And so we just thought it'd be natural to start with Ambassador Jenkins to talk about the strategic level of WPS, and then Ms. Strucke to talk about the operational level, right, from her time at the Pentagon and also in the think tank world. And then we'll talk to Commander Arnold about the tactical level. Now again, we all know that you move up and down, right, if you're good at your job, but we thought that would be the way we start our remarks. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Ambassador Jenkins for her opening comments.
First of all, thank you for inviting me. I can't believe it's just my first time being here at the Naval War College. I've always wanted to come and see what it looks like and be a part of it, so thank you for inviting me and introducing me to the Naval War College. I hear that you had great conversations yesterday, a lot of discussion on policy issues, so it's really good to have an opportunity to talk about some of the strategic things that are happening, and I'll be talking about some of the activities that we do at State Department that are kind of across the board in terms of what we do in a number of countries. My job at State Department as Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security, I oversee 3 bureaus that obviously work in the international security space. So that's everything from arms control and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to export controls and sanctions, to the things that are new in terms of space security issues, the Arctic undersea cables, but also all the security assistance work that we do. And so the bureau one of the 3 bureaus that I lead, obviously, are international security, and one of the bureaus, political military affairs, is the bureau that's the direct connection to DOD and the work that we do. So I'm pleased to see that there are a number of women who are in these fields. I'm obviously a woman, and there are 3 women who were in this position before me, which is really great to have women in these hard security spaces at State Department. And two of my 3 bureaus were led by women. So having women integrated at that level has been really really important, I think, and just for role models for others. Also, had an opportunity to travel to a number of combatant commands, and really pleased to see the work that some of the commands are doing. You know, they have people who are dedicated to women, peace, and security. I was just out at Africa Command and UCOM and PACOM. They all have dedicated women who are focusing on women, peace, and security issues and integrating these concepts into the work. So that's all positive. There may be other commands that are doing it as well, but I think it's important just to see how much is getting integrated into the work of the Department of Defense and all these concepts overall. So as I said, I'm going to go through some of the activities that we do at State Department in terms of promoting women, peace, and security in this hard security space. But I will also say that we have an office at State Department where Ambassador Gupta, who also does a lot of work on women, peace, and security. So it's obviously a concept that we are really trying to promote. We know, and I'm sure this was talked about yesterday quite a bit, about the 25th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325, and really the effort to advance gender equality and promotion of women's rights in all peace and security issues. And the fact that this Security Council resolution really does underscore the women's critical role in conflict prevention, peace building, and post-conflict reconstruction. So in the past year since it's been adopted, it's become a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy. As in coming years, we strategically think it has to be a continued effort in the United States as it competes with rising revisionist power and challenges to the rules-based order. Women, peace, and security in this context really does provide the U.S. and its allies with competitive edge against nations like Russia and Republic of China, People's Republic of China, and that do not really prioritize gender equality and the promotion of women's rights, which I see quite a bit in my multilateral engagements. So as Undersecretary of what we call the T family, I'm pleased to note that my bureaus work to build enduring security partnerships to advance our national security objective with allies and partners across the globe. We do a lot of work with NATO, for example, that also has a women, peace, and security person who's dedicated to these issues. I like to focus on the work State does to incorporate not only women, peace, and security policy, but the mainstream practices and application of gender perspectives into all of the work that we do. The Department of State, particularly the bureau that I run, one of the bureaus I run, Political Military Affairs, has a global portfolio to reach people with all these issues, and we use our security assistance programs to encourage our partners to increase the inclusion of women in military education and training, humanitarian demining, and peacekeeping, all lines of effort that make the United States more competitive against other actors. So very briefly, I'll go through these. The IMIT program, which is an international military education training program, and I can say when I travel around the world, there's so many individuals in the military from other countries who come up to me and say how much they appreciate the IMIT program. So I know it's really doing a lot of great work out there, and we like very much working with our DoD colleagues in promoting this program. So Congress has allocated $3 million to increase women's participation in this program. U.S. embassies are encouraged to include qualified women candidates in this program, at least at the same percentage as they are represented in their host country's military. Since FY 2012, this policy has led to over 4,931 women being trained, with 537 women from 95 countries attending IMIT program courses in FY 2023. Another program that we have that I had a chance to see itself in terms of women participation is our work on legacies and unexploded ordnances. Our conventional weapons instruction program helps partner countries clear explosive hazards and manage conventional weapons stockpiles, providing pathways for women to become deminers and community leaders. This program has been life-changing for women in many countries like Cambodia, Colombia, Iraq, Laos, Lebanon, Ukraine, Sri Lanka, Tajikistan, and Vietnam. And I had an opportunity to go to Vietnam and see some of these women who are doing the demining and working on these unexploded ordnances. Extremely powerful, and they're very dedicated to what they're doing. And so I'm really glad that we're able to increase women's work in that area. Another program called the Global Peace Operations Initiative promotes the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women in peace operations. Our partners who work on Global Peace Initiative represent 39% of UN troop contributing countries and provide 68% of women military peacekeepers. As a demonstration of our strong partnership, a joint U.S.-Netherlands project is also addressing the inadequacy of unisex personal protective equipment for women peacekeepers by funding women's body armor pilot project that we have in both Ghana and Zambia. One other program I just want to highlight is our building capacity through the Global Defense Reform Program. And this program enhances security sector governance and institutional capacity in U.S. partner countries, advancing U.S. foreign policy priorities, including women, peace, and security efforts. This program that we have is advisory and builds the capacity of women in the security sector through training and strategic advising. So the inclusion of women in defense and security sectors is a strategic imperative. It enhances the United States' competitive edge in global strategic competition. So by fostering women's participation through these programs, we promote gender equality, we strengthen national security through these processes, and we advance U.S. foreign policy objectives. The U.S. is committed and remains committed to elevating the voice of women and girls, ensuring their full and meaningful participation in defense and security, and harnessing the full potential of our diplomatic security, political, and economic capabilities. Finally, encouraging partners to increase meaningful participation of women in their defense and security sectors is important. It's a truly mission-critical part of the work we do at States. Women in military do help increase operational effectiveness by fostering communication with local communities, which is crucial for building relationships and gathering life-saving intelligence. Women address gender-specific issues such as protection from gender-based violence, ensuring that peacekeeping efforts, for example, are inclusive and responsive to the needs of all. Women's full, equal, meaningful participation does generate increased attention to the needs and perspectives of the entire community, including the most impacted by displacement, violence, and instability. In this way, by promoting the inclusion of women and girls at all levels of decision-making peace processes and meaningful participation in both civilian and military operations, we enable and harness the entire reservoir of our diplomatic, security, political, and economic potential. So to ensure the U.S., along with our partners and allies, continue to advance these efforts that strengthen our strategic competitiveness, we need the collective efforts of government, international organizations, civil society, and the private sector. And we must ensure that women are not just participants, but leaders in peace and security purposes. We must also ensure the necessary political will and funding to implement the Women, Peace, and Security agenda effectively. By garnering more support for implementation of the Women, Peace, and Security goals, it means we must focus on broadening Women, Peace, and Security efforts to include new security issues, such as climate change, and ensure that future Women, Peace, Security national action plans, strategies, and legislation incorporate the importance of Women, Peace, and Security to strategic competition. So finally, I think it goes without saying that the world has changed in the past 3 years. It's a unique moment in which we are looking at 2 wars in Europe and the Middle East, the collapse of Assad regime in Syria, the growing tensions over the South China Sea and status of Taiwan, as well as managing a changed international security landscape. The global demand for U.S. security cooperation has increased. The work is growing more important by day to day, but how we do it is just as important. It is vital for us to remain laser-focused on building enduring security partnerships that are focused and rooted in strong, accountable, and inclusive institutions. Ones that not only advance women, peace, and security and policy, but institutions that meaningfully integrate the mainstream practices of women, peace, and security. It must be interwoven in that work, if we are to harness the full potential of what I consider to be a whole-of-nation approach to strategic competition, and do so by exemplifying our values as well as our strengths and our advantages. Thank you.
Now we'll turn it over to Ms. Struck with a more operational perspective on the subject.
Good morning. It is such an honor to be here, also my first time in person at the Naval War College, and I want to congratulate all of you in being here for this symposium. I know it's required, but really engaging earnestly and paying attention, as I've seen you doing, and asking questions in the last few days. I want to talk about why it's so strategic that you are asking these questions. When I was at the Pentagon, we were looking at the national security strategy that the Biden administration had put forward, but also reflecting on the previous national security strategies that the Trump administration and other administrations had put forward. And there was a common theme. The common theme is that the threat environment in the world has changed. The fact that the US now is in an era of strategic competition, that in order to meet that moment that we are in, a different set of assumptions and tactics and operations is required. What I used to say when I worked on security cooperation was that the transnational threats and the strategic competition environment have demonstrated that the thinking of yesterday may not be relevant to the challenges of tomorrow. Not to throw out the whole project, but to understand that the bar is raised. The US cannot be able to achieve the kind of continue to promote the rules-based international order that keeps us safe, and to be able to meet this moment without the aid of allies and partners. And there are so many bureaucratic and operational obstacles to being able to do that, that we need more people at the table and not less. We need more interoperability, we need more common ground, we need better, more robust, more resilient institutions, and we need enduring and resilient partnerships. That means we need to take a long view. So how does this relate to women, peace, and security? It relates fundamentally. I want to talk about the fact that we've heard a lot in the past day about the incredible blind spot that exists around notions of gender and notions of the relationship of WPS to our strategic advantages. When I was at the Pentagon, I noticed, and I'm sure many of you in your jobs may have noticed this as well, that there is a tendency to think about this issue as gender blindness or gender neutrality, as people would see it as a strength. It was successfully argued, I thought, yesterday, that this gender neutrality can actually cause harm. It doesn't acknowledge the specific harm that can be caused in societies and in our military operations when the needs and specific strengths of women and girls are not taken into account. So moving from this gender, this idea that we're all the same, women, men are the same, we shouldn't talk about this because it's casting an unfair spotlight, is actually doing harm to half the population and is excluding the very people that we've seen, for example, in conflicts around the world, leading democratic movements that are standing up to authoritarian regimes. If you look at Myanmar, if you look at Ukraine, if you look at Iran, the women in the forefront of these democratic movements to call out the authoritarian regimes are a strength that should be supported by the United States. And a gender-neutral strategy means that we're actually ignoring that potential to use that as an opportunity, and we're ignoring the ways that violence, particularly against women's bodies in conflict, is a signal for future conflict, a predictor, as we heard yesterday in the evidence, and is additionally an area of the sort of terrain of conflict that can't be ignored because it's soft. So I have the view that to focus on this issue is a place of strength. It addresses a blind spot. And I would encourage each of you, if you're hearing this data and it makes you pause in a way that perhaps it wouldn't if it weren't about gender, that should be a signal to you to critically reflect on it even more. And more importantly, if you see your leadership dismissing something because it says the word gender or women, that should be a signal to you that you can deploy the evidence that we heard about the ways that violence against women, subjugation of women in societies actually leads to less peaceful societies, actually leads to more conflict. You can deploy that by being the voice in the room that says it, that maybe it doesn't look like me. And I think that's an important element of the conversation on women, peace, and security, is that we, and I'll reflect a little on my experience with women, peace, and security at the Pentagon, we looked at gender advising as a capability. It was a capability that any person could learn. Just because you're born of one sex or another does not give you an inherent magical understanding of gender dynamics that therefore makes you qualified to teach it. Men and women can be people that can do a gender analysis, that can learn it as a skill like any other skill you'd learn in your military training, and then can then deploy that analysis in conflict settings. They can look at the factors I just mentioned in the human terrain. If they're thinking about a conflict situation or a disaster, what are the ways that men and women react differently to, for example, the fact that there might be overcrowding in a shelter? These are dynamics that directly affect military operations. So understanding that human terrain is essential. I'll give one more example of that, is that if you think about the space of civilian harm mitigation, when people who are thinking about threats in an environment of an active military conflict are looking at targeting, if they ignore the civilian knowledge and the knowledge gained by understanding half the population in how they're looking at human behavior in a conflict, they're going to make deadly assumptions that have led to the wrong people being targeted. They've led to additional civilian harm. They've led to confirmation bias and a lack of information. That's one of the reasons that the Department of Defense's reform last year on civilian harm mitigation was so important, because it broadened that view. And an essential part of that view is the role of women and children, women and girls specifically, and gender-based, gender-sensitive needs in how people react in those environments. So we need more people, not less. We need more information, not less, because that is going to give people, operational people on the ground, the information that they need to make better decisions, and to the information that they need to compete in this information space where what's being used against the United States is the notion of hypocrisy around democracy. So there's an information space element here where it's extremely important for people working on this to be wary if you find yourself feeling in kind of a knee-jerk critical reaction if you hear a word like gender or if you hear a word like democracy. Because these are the things that are being deployed in the multilateral space to discredit what the US is doing broadly as a project. And I was thinking a lot about the president of Kosovo's remarks and the fact that she talked about the fragility of peace. And I was thinking about the fact that a lot of our arguments in the multilateral spaces are also, can be fragile, because the information environment as it's shifting is allowing authoritarian actors to cast aspersions on the US, on what the US is doing with very little information. And I'll link this back to the strategic, which is that as the US continues to promote values-based action that is really more effective to galvanize allies and partners to meet the challenges that we have today, being able to bring together allies and partners that are supporting strong, resilient, democratic institutions, that are supporting the inclusion of women and are taking a different approach, is the kind of advantage that we need in the multilateral environment as well to meet these information demands. So I will say one more thing, which is just that people around the world, they want more rights, not less. The US historically, we've seen the kind of moral support in our population for these values be deployed in a way that has allowed the kind of rationale of promoting democracy in the world, or promoting saving women, or promoting women, peace, and security to almost be used as people have criticized it as a pretext for engaging in conflict. That has created a backlash that I think is really significant to think about too. The backlash that we are seeing that operates in a space of a narrative about women, peace, and security, about saving women, about democracy, I think has created I've heard people use the word hangover about it. It's created such a hangover in policy that it makes those terms and concepts things that are outside the norm of what it's even comfortable for people to talk about. So they don't want to talk about nation building because if you talk about democracy, it sounds like you're talking about nation building. If you talk about gender, it sounds like you're talking about a pretext for invading a country. So I think we have to get beyond that backlash now. We're past the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That's not to say that they don't have lasting effects on our peace and security in the world. But we have to get to a place where we can move beyond stereotypes about women, peace, and security, about gender, about democracy, to see the threat environment and the opportunity space that we're in, and really use data to make operational changes. We need more data. It's been very clear that there's revolutionary data out there, but there's still really big blind spots about the basic ways that women and girls are affected or that are involved in the security environment, or even in the design of basic city planning, which affects, again, everything we do in militaries around the world. So, to conclude, I hope that each of you will take this conversation as an opportunity to bring up these topics even when they seem like they could be uncomfortable, when they seem like they could be challenging the frameworks that perhaps your leadership are more comfortable existing in, the thinking of yesterday, which is something that is valuable to look at, but does not need to be determinative for how we define a way forward that has different needs now for our country and the bar that's raised for us strategically by this national security strategy, and I imagine the next one. Thank you, and I look forward to the rest of this conversation.
Absolutely fabulous. We'll turn over to Commander Arnold, and we'll open it for questions.
All right, thanks. Yeah, thank you for the War College for putting this on and having me to come here and talk. I'm honored to be up here amongst these professionals. This also is my first time to the War College, and as a naval officer, it feels really good to be back near the water. I'm currently the current operations officer at Special Operations Command Africa, which is a TSOC that falls under AFRICOM. Now, we joke at the TSOC that it's actually, you spell TSOC A-R-M-Y, so it feels really good to be back here on a Navy base. Now, from a programmatic perspective, I'm probably the least qualified person to be up here talking about WPS. But as a current operations officer, what I can give you is the knuckle dragger's perspective on what we at SOCAF are doing for WPS. Like most of the other mid-grade field officers here, I spent most of my time in combat zones throughout the world. And I've always felt that we were missing something in the way that we were, conducting our strategies in those areas. And throughout my time at SOCAF, I saw a lot of stuff come through my desk, and one of the things that started standing out to me were these WPS events. And so I kind of started asking questions, what are they doing, and became really interested in the effects that we were having with the WPS framework. So I'll start first in Kenya. In 2022, we started doing some conferences and some community level engagement in the Kenya-Somalia border area, which is a really kind of porous border that Al-Shabaab uses to their advantage. So we started working with the civil military support elements and doing some local engagement bookended by KLE engagements with male and female leaders throughout the local community and through the SOCAF leadership. And we're conducting what we called sports diplomacy. And what that really means is soccer games with local Kenyan Defense Forces with males and females, along with local soccer teams, again, male and female. And I was shocked at the amount of rapport building that happens in just that simple act of setting that kind of engagement up, bringing in local broadcasts, using social media, local TV and personalities, and really just kind of starting to build that community. What that led to is we started to hear about some of the gendered elements of VEO and how they are recruiting and the tactics that they are using in their VEO fight. What we started seeing specifically is some women trafficking patterns, reintegration as those women were escaping from Al-Shabaab and trying to reintegrate into the community. And very important for the targeting cycle is we started hearing about how Al-Shabaab members were becoming disenchanted with their experience within the VEO is not what they thought it was going to be. And so we started using some of that information and feeding it back into our own PSYOP campaigns and our own messaging campaigns against Al-Shabaab and trying to promote defection or sow discourse inside that group. And all that happened because of those WPS events that we started doing in that local area. Furthermore, we were able to build a reconnaissance network of women across that border region, which again, as we talked about information, further, our reach and our capability to gather intelligence, which is extremely important, again, in the targeting cycle, is now improved because we have, new collection coming throughout that whole area. So from that, we took that kind of same model and started applying it to Benin, another place where up in northern Benin, there's a lot of VEO activity as well. So again, aligning WPS activities with the SIMC efforts and involving women into those SIMC teams as they were engaging with folks up in northern Benin. So there's a huge separation between southern Benin and northern Benin, and a lot of the all-male SIMC teams were having issues really connecting with the folks up in the north. But lo and behold, you integrate some women into that, and all of a sudden, some of those communities up there, women for the first time in northern Benin, seeing other women in uniform, just eye-opening. And they had no idea that that was even happening, that women were even serving in the military. So again, really just giving us access into some of those areas that we didn't have before, and really, talking about the subjugation of women and bringing them out of that state. I think we've had some really good effects there. And then that also led into follow-on engagements with MedCaps, specifically focusing on female health. Again, really just improving our access into those areas and really helping some of the females. And again, that was really just with one WPS advisor that we added into that scenario, having outsized, incredible return on investment for our efforts there. And finally, in Tunisia, almost exactly a year ago, during one of our engagements up there, we were approached by the Brigade Special Forces commander, and he asked, hey, we want to integrate women who are currently serving in our military into the Special Forces here. Can you help us? Of course, we said yes, and started building out a plan. So how do we take women and integrate them into this Special Forces element? So a series of engagements kind of trying to understand what their selection and pipeline process looks like, and then reaching out to the SOCOM claimancy as a whole. And we were able to build an all-female cross-functional team of an OPSYC, a PT, a master fitness trainer, an operator, dietitian from throughout SOCOM, came together, went to Tunisia and started working with the 7 female candidates a few months out before their course actually started. And then also working with the cadre who facilitate that commando course training and starting to ask those questions about, hey, how are you as cadre going to integrate these women into this training process and make sure that all of the stakeholders, so whether it's the students, the medical staff, or the cadre, we're all prepared to integrate women into their formation and figuring out like women's specific needs throughout training. How are we going to be able to support them? So there still are 7 currently going through that's happening right now. With that 2-week engagement with that cross-functional team I talked about, saw some significant improvements where some of the candidates were really unable to do push-ups, pull-ups, basic physical tests, and months later they're keeping up with the men, and just again really thriving in that environment with a relatively low investment. We're seeing a significant return there. So our panel really is talking about strategic competition, and I talked about some specific examples, but what does that really have to do with our strategic competition? And I think Niger is a perfect example. So last summer, we obviously pulled all of our forces out of Niger. That was about a month's worth of 2 C-17s every day, just running loops, getting all of our forces out of there. What was happening at the same time is the Russians were moving in, right? So if you think about stability and us ceding ground to our competitors, they're gonna fill that vacuum, and that's obviously not a good situation for as unstable as things are in Africa. We're ceding ground to our competitors, and we can't let that happen. So really figuring out is how are we propping up our partners to fend off our strategic competitors and making sure that we're building a resilient and sustainable security posture in Africa.
All right. That was perfect, well timed as well. We have time for questions. I'll do a quick framing, and then I'm actually going to ask a question that I hope the panelists will conclude with towards the end. We're at the War College, just as a PME institution, we talk about ends and means, and like so much of American foreign policy, WPS is both an end and a means. So it's a goal that we're trying to advance, but it's also a way that we approach doing our jobs to make us more effective, and I think all three panelists actually made that very clear. And what's very clear is, again, the panelists have done a very good job of this, that we are entering a different era, if we haven't already, of strategic competition. That's the name of the panel. And this is a world in which all the tools that are at the disposal of the United States are just going to have to evolve and change. The defense industrial base is going to get bigger, but it's also going to make different things. Free trade, we are taking a very different approach as a country to the global international trade system, security systems, et cetera. So my question for the group at the end is sort of, how does WPS as a means evolve? It probably has to change as the international system changes. What is your sort of central insider punchline that you could tell your successors for the next 10 years, whatever, for this new era? Hard to end on a better note than that. Please join me in thanking our keynote panelists.
Thank you so very much. I very much appreciated the different levels of perspectives, and I hope you found it insightful too.